Well, today we are here speaking with Dustin Brookshire and Julie E. Bloemeke about their incredible anthology, Let Me Say This, a Dolly Parton poetry anthology. This is a really wonderful collection of poems about a truly wonderful American icon. And I'm really excited to speak with you both today about what you've put together here, about Dolly and about pop culture and poetry. So thank you for agreeing to talk with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
You are very, very welcome. I started right at the front of this anthology when I got it in my hands. And Dustin, I know that in the introduction to the book, you write that you often turn to Dolly when you need not just any inspiration, but inspiration to believe in yourself as a poet. Can you say more about that? And did that have an impact on how this project came to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, so when we find a lot of faith, I guess, and maybe in our English teachers. I feel like, especially gay boys, like we're always besties with our English teachers. And all of my English teachers always encouraged me to write, except for one who actually told me to stop writing poetry. Short story, turns out she was homophobic. This story later came out when I made friends with the teacher that I went to high school with after high school. And I think about when people tell us to stop doing what we love or what we feel we're good at. And Dolly never listened to anyone that tried to discourage her. You know, she, as I talk about in the introduction, said the day of graduation, she was moving to Nashville to become a star. People laughed at her. I mean, we look at it now, we're like, who the hell would laugh at Dolly Rebecca Parton? Like, I mean, she's laughing at going to the bank all the time. And she did it her way. She believed in herself. And I have to remember that sometimes we have to trust ourselves, even if what we feel like we're not going to make it. We have to keep on keeping on, because you never know if you stop that fight, if you stop pushing yourself, it will never happen. And so I just like to think of Dolly, in the stories that she's told. And, she jokes about, you can make a nice little soup with mustard and ketchup packets. She was taking food outside of hotel rooms to get by just because she believed in her dream. Thankfully, I'm not having to do that. And I don't know that I have the dedication to do that, to be honest. But that's my inspiration, is just to continue to believe in myself and trust the words that I'm coming up with, just like Dolly did.
That's awesome. That's really great to hear that early feeling you had about identifying with her grew into something where you're actually able to honor her and honor her work through poetry. That's really wonderful. Julie, what is your relationship to Dolly's music like?
Oh, well, it is absolutely transformed because of working with Dustin. But in the introduction, I mentioned that, Dolly's voice has always felt like home to me. And I say that for a number of reasons, because my first association with Dolly actually came through my grandmother, because until I got too big, I would crawl up onto her lap and she would rock me and sing to me. And even though she was from Indiana, there was an inflection in her voice that's distinctly Dolly. And also, by the way, she absolutely loved Pigeon Forge. So there may have been some, intersection there. So when I heard Dolly sing, and as I grew up, it was always sort of this connection to home for me, even though I'm from Ohio. So it feels, very centered. And then Dustin and I found out we had this mutual affection for Dolly, and Dustin discovered that I had a huge transgression, which was that I had never been to a Dolly Parton concert. And so we went to our first Dolly Parton concert together in Alpharetta, Georgia, and it was 90 degrees plus. They were carting people off with heat stroke. We sweat through everything, and everyone around us was just bedazzled and bedecked and all Dolly. I mean, the whole 9 yards. And that night was absolutely transformational, because it's one thing to listen to her music, but it's another to see her as a performer. And that's one of the things that I think I gravitate toward also. Not only her performance, but her verbal rhetorical skills, right? In interviews, like I'm fascinated by how she turns phrases in interviews and, keeps people on their toes. And the telling of story and antidote, and that kind of pulled in for me too. But also, Dustin and I both talked about this, at lower points, it's been Dolly's songs that have gotten us through. And that's, we both gravitate toward her for that too. If I need a good cry, I put on The Secret, I put on Little Sparrow, you know, whatever, anything Dolly, really. And it just kind of moves the energy through. So that's
That's
sort of the
wonderful.
encapsulated version of my relationship to Dolly.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you make about it. It is the music, but it's also, it is who she is as a person that is so inspiring. Her, like you said, her rhetorical skills, her sense of who she is. I first heard about your anthology, gosh, I don't know where. I got a call for submission somewhere on in social media land, but I immediately thought of my dear friend Jenny Molberg, who is a contributor to this anthology, because we had just finished looking at, she'd sent me a draft of her poem, the poem that became Is It All You? And that poem deals with that element of Dolly, her just refusal to be classified and to be told who she is. And I'm so pleased to see that that is a component of the other poems in the anthology, that her personhood as well as her art is at the center of so many of these inspiring poems. That's wonderful. I know a little bit about the anthology in that I know it began as a special issue of a literary magazine. That's sort of the genesis of this anthology. Is that correct?
Yes, so I found and the editor of Limp Wrist. So yes, you heard that right, Limp Wrist. And when Dolly was turning 75, I thought, oh, I should do a special issue. It's a great number to do something celebratory with. And Julie's my ride or die on a lot of things. We've been friends for over 10 years. And I was like, you know, I'm going to ask her if she wants to do it. I think that we can survive working with each other on this. You know, always things are different. You put the business hats on, but it was a really great experience and a lot of fun working on the issue of Limp Wrist. And we weren't even finished with the issue. And I think I called Julie. I don't think it was an email. I called her and I said, you know, I think we maybe should do an anthology. I think that, I mean, we have part of the work done because we have poems for this issue. And next thing you know, she's agreeing that, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So we had not even posted the issue yet. And we had already sent out some feelers to publishers. Madville, I mean, sounds like a brag, and I guess it is, but we're happy about it. Madville was our first choice because we had friends, Colin Kelly and Karen Head, that did anthology Mother Mary, and had excellent things to say about working with Madville. So you can't beat a personal recommendation from friends. So we were over the moon when they told us, oh yeah, we'd love to do this. But then we had to keep it a secret for a year because we knew a year in advance, because we wanted to announce on Dolly's next birthday. So like we had a whole system of keeping things with her birthday. I think that's the longest I've kept a secret ever.
Oh my gosh, it was so very hard. It was so very hard. And working with Dustin on this was fantastic. Like, we were blown away by the level of enthusiasm that we got for the magazine. And so that then sort of fielded these phone calls about, you know, what do you think? What do you think? I think this could really, you know, we could really pull this off. And how would we do it? And, you know, what kind of sort of tact would we take in all of it? And there's this great quote by Dolly where she says that any relationship is like a house with an upstairs. It's got 2 stories. But Dustin and I really, we were in the ranch house the whole time. I mean, we were just on the same page, completing each other's sentences. Not to say we didn't challenge each other a little bit, but it was always like working in tandem, in partnership, and just a little, a few moments. But we talked everything through. And, you know, there's another story that we like to tell, because the first time I went to Pride with Dustin in Tennessee, of all places, we were at a bar and we looked up and there was a picture of Dolly Parton, a poster of Dolly Parton right above us. And ever since then, it's almost like she's been the guiding force in all of this. So, you know, you just, as Dustin says, you never know when you transfer or transmute, or all of the energy comes together from a friendship into a business relationship, how that's going to work out. But it really was very seamless and full of a lot of like laughter, joy, tears, enthusiasm, dropping everything to call one another and go, oh my God, did you, well, actually, to quote directly, girl, did you see this poem that came in? You know, so we had a lot of moments like that too. And I just, that's what it is, right? When poetry gives you that sense of vibrational buoyancy, when you just are so compelled that you have to share it. And we had that kind of ping pong effect throughout this whole anthology. So it's been amazing. And then to be able to sort of share that energy in the book launches and in the events that we've done, it's been really, really awesome. And actually incredibly humbling and overwhelming to find these poems that we worked with for so long, to see them then read through the contributors' voices, through their energy and through their way of bringing the poem into the world. And I don't know, I can't even think of a way to describe it verbally. I think Dustin's kind of on the same page about this, because it was just so, like, we didn't expect how impactful and how deeply meaningful it was going to be to see them all do this. So
I consider it a success that I don't cry every time we have an event, because it does actually like the first few. And then we had an event and someone got emotional and I loved it. And she cried and I was like, oh, there it goes. Here it comes for me. Like,
it's over.
Everybody
We had tissues at the launch. We were ready. We knew.
That's great. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about how powerful, fandom is, and how powerful, I mean, shared experiences are certainly powerful, but shared liking of a musical artist, I mean, it's also a kind of a shared experience where you're coming together with other people to share what has been maybe a private experience for you of loving this artist. And all of those people in a room, I can imagine, coming together with their poems about what Dolly means to them has got to be just really, really impactful. What else has the reception for the anthology been like now that it's out in the world? Can you say more about that? Is there any sense that Queen Dolly Parton is aware of this anthology's existence?
Well, like that? I think I called Julie one day and I was like, girl, because that's how I do all serious, enlightening conversations that start with girl. And I was like, girl, I wish our individual books got as much attention as this anthology, which it's been, it's lovely and it's nice. But it's been very heartwarming and even affirmative of how much people have been interested and want to talk about the book. Which of course makes me extremely, extremely happy. And I love that people buy it because they're doing a little good in the world, because every copy purchased, we are donating our annual editor royalties to the Imagination Library, Dolly Parton's Imagination
Fantastic.
Library. So we are stoked about that. Now I forgot what the other part of your question was. I started talking about the Imagination Library. My book was about to talk about let's not ban books and all kinds of other things.
We can get there. We can get there.
Yeah.
The Imagination Library is definitely something I wanted to touch on. I think that Dolly has proven herself to be quite literary. She is now like a friend to all readers and to writers because of this program that she has. I mean, I have Dolly Parton Imagination Library books in my daughter's library. It's just an incredible program. And for those who don't know, this is a program where anybody can sign up and have a book delivered to their child monthly forever for their childhood, which is incredible. What an amazing use of your material resources. So I think she's sort of proven to be a great literary citizen, really. What else do you think makes her a good subject for poetry? We've talked a little bit about like her rhetorical power, her sense of who she is. Are there other things that you think make poets gravitate towards her? You've had, lots of poets in this anthology write about her. It seems like a lot of people had Dolly poems ready at hand, like they are already writing poems about Dolly. They feel that she's a good subject. What do you think makes her a good subject to you?
Well, I think because she's not, just on one street. Dolly is all over the place. She does anything that she wants and typically makes it successful. She's got a perfume. She writes books. She did a book with James Patterson. She writes her songs. She does movies for Netflix. She had her stint in Hollywood. She puts so much out there that it's just ripe for material to write about, given that she's not that, people that are only singing, you can't write about them, but she just opens up these different ways to approach her than just as a singer or songwriter. And I think that, that visibility too, I mean, the longevity of her career, I was thinking, when she was inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, she was the last one on the show and she got the most screen time. And I was sort of like, I mean, that confused me a little bit because I'm like, well, I mean, she even admits she's not rock and roll, but then it hit me, out of everybody there, out of all the generations, if you said her name, I without a doubt would bet money that every person would say, yes, I know Dolly. But some of these other people who I know, because I grew up listening to 80s music and I listened to things because my brother, the generations don't necessarily would recognize the names. But Dolly,
Yeah.
in this long career, just has that presence that people recognize. And I know, Julie, you have something to add.
Oh, I mean, we could go on, we could ping pong this question back and forth, right? It could be a drinking game. What are the different attributes of Dolly? But I think one of the things that was so fun about this anthology too is we had the opportunity to call in stories about Dolly that were not as well known, or to kind of subvert cliche a little bit, which I really enjoy, because I think sometimes our tendency, well, it's sort of our human tendency to box in people or define them in a certain way. And this really is sort of shining all these different lights on different facets of Dolly. There's a lot about her comedic timing, for example, the fact that she's a masterful lyricist, which I don't think is recognized enough. The fact that she plays how many different instruments, Dustin? Like, I can't even keep up with them. The pan flute, the auto harp, like, and she's also just so incredibly human. And, I mean, when we went to the first concert together, I could not stop laughing, because she got up and said, I'm actually, I'm going to rap, and I can't rap, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I want to. And she wasn't good at it, but it didn't matter, because she stepped into that and said, I'm just going to own it. And that's the human part of me. And then there's another moment in an interview where someone asked her, what are 3 words used to describe yourself? She's like, trash, trash, and trash. Right. So, I mean, she just invites, I think, personal connection, and through all generations, through, different stances. And I think that's why she has the appeal that she has. Right. And then also, my God, the fashion and the way that she handles herself, and how that has transmuted over time from, feeling like she had to fit into a certain category. And now, she's breaking out of all of that. I mean, the photos for, the Rockstar album that are coming out, right? She just enjoys the theatrical aspect. And her costumes alone, like, I can't wait for that book to come out, right? I'm super excited. So again, like I said, I could go on and on, but I'll try to keep it brief.
No, that's wonderful. The fact that you can both go on and on means you're the exact right people for the job of making this anthology. So that's great. We got the right people to shepherd us through. I think, I think when I was sort of coming up as a younger poet, there was this sense that maybe including pop culture in your work dated it somehow, or made it somehow less serious, writing about television shows, writing about popular music. I think that I feel that we are beyond that in most ways. I think that it's understood and accepted that pop culture is a good fit for a subject, as fit as any other in poetry. But I think there are still folks who are less inclined to use it. What might you say to someone who's in that position, who doesn't think that Dolly Parton is a fit subject for a book of poems?
Who the fuck are you? Like, no, can I cuss? I hope so. I just did it. But that's what I would say.
Dustin doesn't hold back.
I think it's a gateway. And people are like, somebody was asking, like, what's a good book of poetry to give someone that says they don't like poetry? And they thought I was just being self-serving, but I was like, this Dolly book. Like, who doesn't love Dolly? I mean, you hear people say, oh, I don't love country music, but I love Dolly Parton. Or, I don't really care about this, but I like Dolly Parton. Like, everybody comes in, you never
read, but I don't read poetry. Yeah.
Right. But her approachability, I think, helps like ease people, into it. And I mean, I think we had a couple people that are like, really, that's going to be too much Dolly. And I'm like, is there ever such a thing? It's too much Dolly. I just think it's very approachable for anybody that just thinks poetry is not for them.
Yeah.
They should give this book a try.
Yeah. Well, and there's an accessibility aspect that I think is really remarkable. And Dustin and I were extremely pleased, because we had no idea when we put out the call what we were going to get. But there's just such an incredible diversity in the book. And Dustin can talk a little bit more about that too. But the age range, for example, is just wild. And then we have, poets that were finalists for the Pulitzer Prize, along with someone who has published their very first poem in this anthology, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
I love that there's sort of that encompassing factor. And again, it goes back to the invitation aspect of Dolly. She really does invite people in. She's always, giving inroads to people to say, come and, join in. And I feel like that's what this book does too. It just sort of opens its arms and says, come on. And even for people that aren't particular Dolly fans, which again, I don't know how that's possible, I think there are poems in here that, they might be through the lens of Dolly, but they take it into such another place that it's also outside of Dolly at the same time. So then it doesn't become a one-note anthology. That's always a concern too but it just was not. And we were so particularly pleased with that. We have form poems, we have prose poems. So there's a real range there too. And I know there's some statistics, but I'll lob that back to Dustin because he knows that a little bit better.
72% of the contributors are women. Roughly 52% identify as part of the LGBTQI community. So we're quite proud of that. And like Julie said, in having their first poem to people who have a lot of awards, it's exciting. And we were very, very clear with each other. Like, we did not want just a book of praise, like every poem worshiping Dolly. Like, we didn't want that. And I have to say that, like, we really didn't get a lot of those poems, out of the bulk. I mean, we got more Jolene rewrites, even though we put in the submissions, do not give us song rewrites. do not rewrite Jolene. So I was a little surprised at how many people did not follow instructions. So just a friendly reminder to anybody watching, please follow your submission guidelines, because if you don't get your poem in a book or a magazine.
Well, I'm glad I actually missed my chance to submit my poem that has a Jolene reference that I wouldn't want to run afoul of the guidelines.
We love a good reference, but we are actually talking. We got straight up rewrites. Like,
yeah, exactly. Our feeling was, how do you mess with excellence? Yeah. So
that's true. Very, very true. I was thinking about, you mentioned, I think Julie, you had mentioned that Dolly is just an excellent lyricist. And I think that one thing I think about a lot is the moment in 2016 when Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature and sort of launched into the spotlight again, a very, very old question, which is, what is the relationship of poetry or lyric songwriting to what is that relationship between poetry and song? Precisely. It's the oldest relationship that poetry has, right? At the same time, it seems like a new question. Bob Dylan winning the Nobel Prize for Literature. What? But I think that there is something undeniable about the craft of particular songwriters. So I was wondering, if you would care to share what Dolly songs feel most poetic to you if you had to choose.
Ooh. Oh, who's going to start this one, Dustin? Is that you or me? Okay. So to me, I don't know that I would. Here's the funny thing. You could ask me this now, and tomorrow I'll give you a completely different answer, right? This is what
totally
I do.
True.
I'm just evolving with it. But the album that I feel like that is unsung and that doesn't get enough attention is the Bluegrass album, right? The Grass is Blue. And it's not just for the lyrics that are in it, but also her prowess in that album is really fantastic. And I don't feel like it's been seen enough. I go back to The Seeker again and again, and, folks are like, but doesn't it bother you? Like, you're talking about the weakness and the frailty in the lyrics. And I'm like, but it doesn't, because it's a call, right? It depends on when you look at the song lyrics on paper and look at them like a poem, you see that they actually come in from different vantage points, right? So that song, to me, it's not an admission so much of, I'm lower and beneath, but it's rather a call to help, a prayer, a feeling like of never being alone, right? And I think for me, Dolly comes in a very sort of spiritual way with poetry. So you're combining music, you're combining lyrics, you're combining, oral tradition in a way, storytelling, all of this sort of coming together. So it's really hard for me to just pick one song. But, I will say that album, because that's one that I wish, had gotten more attention, and maybe will now, who knows?
Right. We're going to give it a little more attention right now.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and I would go on and on about Just Because I'm a Woman, but I know Dustin's going to want to talk about that one. So
Yeah, that depends on my day too. So I love Just Because I'm a Woman, which is a nod. Our title is a nod to that song. But
Yeah.
one of the songs that I always like to go back to is Shattered Image, which she recorded twice. And I actually like the version that's on Halo and Horns. But it's just, when she was promoting that album, she's talking about people bringing up things that she'd done. And she's like, well, yeah, I did it, but doesn't mean I wanted people talking about it. And so she's that sort of inspired the song. I mean, she has these great lines. If you live in a glass house, don't throw stones, don't shatter my image till you look at your own. Look at your reflection in your house of glass. Don't open my closet if your own's full of trash. Stay out of my closet if your own's full of trash. And I just love how she takes some of those cliches that, you know, we know and works it in this beautiful song called Shattered Image. And then Just Because I'm a Woman, you know, it's just a gorgeous song. I mean, she wrote the song because her husband, 8 months after getting married, asked her if she was a virgin. And she said, I wasn't going to start a marriage on a lie. So I told him, and then he got mad. And she's like, he wasn't a virgin. Why was he so mad? And so she wrote,
Yeah.
Just Because I'm a Woman. And like, who doesn't that hit as a poet? Who of us have not been dating somebody and wrote a poem, you know, for a significant other, a fiance, a husband, a wife? Like, you know, we do that. But the, you know, the song, they wouldn't play it because it's the double standard. It wasn't getting played in the US. And Dolly believes that, you know, it just was the culture, you know, calling out men. And then she re-recorded that. They did a tribute album called Just Because I'm a Woman, and had Melissa Etheridge, a lot of other great stars singing her songs. And so she did another version of it, and she added on some more lyrics at the end. And it's just so gorgeous. And of course, the song is for women, but as an outsider, as a gay man, it hits me too. And I think it could hit any outsider, a person who feels like there's this double standard of how they've been treated. They resonate with that song. But first and foremost, it is a song for women. It is an anthem for women, and that has to be acknowledged.
That's so great. I love hearing you guys talk about your deep knowledge of Dolly. And I think what you're saying too about her song being sort of too much for the culture at the time is also sort of a clue of how powerful it was and is. I think that if that were published as a poem, it would have flown totally under the radar. But because now this is in the public eye, popular music just has such a much larger audience. It confronts the culture in a different way. I think that's really interesting. And I also wanted to ask the other side of that question, which is, what is the relationship of some of these poems to the actual music? Do any of these feel like they would make a good song to you? Are there poems in here that feel like they are exceedingly musical? I know you said you're turning down flat out rewrites of song lyrics, but are there particularly musical poems here that you can think of that you'd like to point out?
We do have a Spotify playlist, right? Which all of any reference to a Dolly Parton song that's in the book is in the Spotify playlist.
I love
with
that.
a few exceptions, because there were some that weren't available, especially like some of the older ones. But boy, your questions are great, because that's stumping me.
Yeah, I was trying to think if I was going to put one to music. It's hard.
It is hard.
I am not a songwriter or lyricist myself. I envy those who can. So I don't have a secret answer or anything waiting.
I mean,
I think some of them would work with musical accompaniment, but I don't know. I'm trying to think, when you say I get very literal because of my day job, I work in compliance. I'm like, could I sing this? And I'm like, but I think some of them would go great with a little guitar, you know, in the background. There are a number that would go well being read to that. But if I would turn them into a song, I struggle on that one. I think you're going to be the first person to stump us on a question.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I think like a villanelle would lend itself to a song because you have the repetition, right? So Beth Gillis's Villanelle, for example. But interestingly, I'm sitting here thinking, LJ Cisco has her new book just came out, The Daughter of Man, but she has a poem called The Yassification of Dolly Parton, which, I mean, my God, that title already. But her poem has a lot of breaking and caesura. So, you know, it would be interesting to see what someone would do, you know, musically with that, just in terms of the enjambment and the, you know, the breaking throughout the poem itself. But I mean, those are the first two that come to mind for me. But
And
That's
maybe
great.
Never Did Say by Caridad Moreau Grandlier. It's sort of like a, you know, I'm thinking like the old world ballad. I mean, hers not an old world ballad.
yes,
Thinking like the older songs, you know, that Dolly sort of, she talks about. If you've listened to Dolly Parton's America, talks
Mhm.
about some of those first songs that she learned, the ballads. And I think that Caridad's is a modern world ballad, if you will, of love and heartbreak.
yeah,
That's
and
great.
coming into your own also, right? So
Mhm.
which is another, that's another Dolly element for sure. But yeah, gosh, what a great question. Now, now the wheels are gonna.
Now you can go back through it again and say, oh,
Yes,
that was
and
Well,
part of why I have so little, I'm so bad about my musical background and knowledge. So, you know, poetry I gravitate toward, but please, you know, don't ever ask me to sing. I tried to learn to play instruments. I was terrible at it. So I have this, you know, admiration from afar in terms of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, one thing I want to make sure I ask you is my favorite question to ask poets, to ask anybody I'm interviewing here, is whether or not you have a favorite poem or poet that appears in pop culture elsewhere, in a TV show, in a film, or in a song. So sort of the reverse of your anthology, where we have pop culture icon Dolly Parton popping up in poetry. Are there any poems or poets that appear in pop culture and you remember that moment, you enjoy that moment, anything like that that you could share?
I'm not sure that I understand the question, but like for me, Kevin Young has that amazing poem about Prince, for example. And I remember I just fell off my chair because it's not just the incorporation of the lyrics, but it's also, oh, I even think he has like all the stresses like Prince lyrics. And I can't remember
That's
the
very
title,
cool. That's
but
very cool.
is that
Yeah,
what?
most of the stuff that I cover, that I tend to cover on my Substack is when you find like Ada Limon, for example, her poem was recently recited during an episode of The Good Doctor,
Okay,
which
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
very unusual and exciting to me as a major like primetime TV show. That's actually one of the first things I wrote about was Maggie Smith's poem, Good
Yes.
Bones, being on Madam Secretary. It kind of turned
Yep.
her career into this viral sensation. That was one of the things that pushed me to kind of look around for more things like this, to see the ways in which poetry and poets were being discussed in pop culture, with the goal of sort of elevating both. And so I just always like to see if there's like a moment that for example, there's a Shakespeare sonnet that pops up in A Quiet Place that I like to write about. I wrote about that I think is really interesting. Dustin, has anything like that ever come across your radar?
I love when it shows up on Jeopardy, but not in the category as poetry. Like when it somehow works in and it's not the obvious. And now I'm blanking because I feel like it just happened recently. I love to, with my fiance, I like us to keep score. We're not doing it right now because they're doing Jeopardy Masters. And I'm like, those questions are
Yeah,
way
they
too
are. That's
hard.
right.
You know, thank you. But when it's regular Jeopardy and like to keep score, and I feel like that just happened a couple of weeks ago. And I knew the answer. I was like, oh, I got one. But I love when that happens on Jeopardy and it's not a poetry category. So it's that unexpected pull in. And I love when you
I'm
see,
glad you really said that.
because people post pictures, like when it's, you know, ever there's poetry, you see all the pictures of the questions on Facebook and Twitter. It makes my heart very happy to see that.
That's awesome. Yeah, my mom will text me a picture of the TV screen with the Jeopardy poetry question on it just to see if I got it. But I'm glad you said that, because I've been debating with myself, like, is Jeopardy pop culture? And I think it is. I think it is. And so I think that that's something that I'm brewing on writing about, the kinds of questions that get asked, the kinds of poets that come up, and also the way they come up when it's not even about poetry. That's really interesting. Yeah. I know that you both have your own work in this anthology as a testament to your love for Dolly, and I would love to have you read your poem for us if you would like to share it. I'd love to know a little bit too, maybe about how your poem came to be too.
Julie, you want to go first? You want me to go first? You pick.
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead. Yeah, it's great. Dustin and I both have really funny backstories because we were working on this anthology and neither one of us had a Dolly poem, and we were like, oh my God. And of course, one of the most difficult things I think to do is write a poem on command or write an occasional poem, right? And for me, what happened was I tend to have a very nuanced and bizarre desktop organization system. Don't get me started. But I was trying to find a particular document about the anthology. And so I used the search feature and I typed in Dolly and a couple other words, I don't remember exactly what. And this document came up from, oh gosh, 2011. And I was like, what is that? And I opened it up and it turns out that I had started a poem after Dustin and I went to Dolly's Better Day concert. And it was 2011, right? Dustin, is that right? I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So, because we did Pure and Simple a few years later. And I was blown away. So what happened then was I had sort of the foundation and the structure for the poem, but of course I wanted to sort of bring it more up to date and add some details to it. But a lot of what got me going with the poem was Dolly's, storytelling element in concerts. So when I read this, there will be parts that, because you can't see it on the page, that are in italics. So what I like to say is if it sounds like Dolly speaking, it is. So the title of the poem is called Dollywood, which is not the theme park, but rather Dolly and then WOULD. It's too easy to pigeon forge Dolly into 9 to 5, double D twang, to not heed her Better Day concert advice. Darlin', own your truth. Because Dolly became Dolly in a fallen chapel of Deep Woods, Tennessee, strumming into the air, praising into the only tongue she knew, her congregation of God, song, and sex, naked graffiti lusting sanctuary over the walls. The sexuality, the spirituality, the sensuality, that's exactly who I am, she tells Dolly Parton's America. The joy of the truth I found there is with me to this day. I had found God, and I found Dolly Parton, and I loved them both. And don't forget how they all tried to stop her, but even Daddy couldn't have whooped the glitter out of her as she snuck out back to press pokeberries to her lips, lined her eyes with blackened match tips, or how she'd head over to town just to witness some something strutting down the walk, goldfish swimming in those coveted acrylic heels, an invocation for this woman's town trollop red nails, breasts booming forward, all a beyond compare, the eventual Jolene. And all the mothers saw this too, said, oh no, ducking their heads, checking that top button for good measure, already forming the trash words they would whisper later over fences. I admit it. I too used to see only wigs and corsets until I finally got it. Only so much fake could be true. And tonight, Dolly proves it, pulls in the lights all around her, invites us to pour into that same cup of ambition, all 5 foot something of her who yodels, fiddles, plays bluegrass, raps, then can't, belts gospel, all a cappella in her little sparrow, louder than a thunderstorm, sending chills through 98 degrees of solid humidity, whooping us still under cowboy hats, all the faces painted just like hers, smiling back from their derelict hearts into a song of every last thing unsaid. A woman married decades who writes heartbreak like she's lost every last time, this country blood in all of her colors, shakes herself to fire in rhinestone fringe, opens the butterfly down in me, holds the mic to the voice I never allowed, says, own your trash, says, make a joyful noise, says, I've always been, says Jesus. And I want to tell her how my shut mouth was my loaded gun, my quiet khaki was a way to hide. I was taught never to be noticed, learned that my peace kept my father's hands from raising, my mother's voice from breaking, that the good girl took almost 40 years to realize she wasn't, and good wasn't best besides. I am not my own island in this stream, but now together, you and I, Dolly, we sparkle and quake, we are holding everything, walking down that same city street, the higher the hair, the closer to God, singing mighty after mighty fractured song, stomping our glitz and sex and Jesus, praising with every last step. And here we come again. God, and there I go.
Julie, thank you. Man,
You're welcome.
that is wonderful. I just love that. It really is great to hear your poem after hearing you talk about your philosophy for the anthology and what Dolly has meant to you and other people. That's wonderful. You really did the thing which you said was so core to the poems, which is that they are about Dolly, but they're about so much more than that, and the best way. That's fantastic. Dustin, would you share your poem for us and tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. And before I do that, one of the questions that you asked when I diverted us about the Imagination Library just came back. You had asked, does Dolly know about the book? So I would just like to answer that and say that the photograph that is on the cover was released by Dolly Parton for our use. So that was from, as we call them, Team Dolly. And I don't,
Amazing.
I almost cried every time when I would type a text to Julie and the text would be, have we heard from Dolly's attorney today? Like, because like in this life thought that like, we're gonna, that I would ever hear from Dolly Parton's attorney. But dreams do come true. See, that's why you have to keep on doing what you want to do, as Dolly would want us to. And we know they, all that she and her team ask for is copies of the book. And they're like, can you send 10 to 20? And of course, Kim at Madville, we didn't have to say anything. It was like, I'm sending 20. And I was like, that is the right answer, because if Dolly asked for 10 to 20, you send 20.
Absolutely.
So we're hopeful that, I would love to meet her, but what I will accept in this world is she's notorious for her letters on pink paper with the little butterfly. I want one of those little letters. I will immediately hand it to the fiance so he can protect it, so I don't cry on it and ruin it. And we run to my and pay for overpriced framing for it. But that is my dream, is that we get notes sent to us from her. But
absolutely, as a writer, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely.
Yes, to have the written word. Absolutely, that's so great to know.
So my poem, Julie's right. I was like, called her and I was like, girl, but this wasn't one of the girl, like, this was more of a girl. I was like, we don't have poems. I was like, what in the hell am I going to do? Like, Julie talked about that moment where we were in the Nashville bar and the Dolly sign was above us. I was like, I have a poem that mentions that. I was like, but it's like, Dolly's got one line in the poem. I mean, if I have to, I'll put that in there, but I really don't want to. I curate a reading series called the Wild and Precious Life series. And a lot of times I get inspired hearing people read. And so I'm pretty sure it was a Wednesday night after Wild and Precious Life, and had a little too much Costco brand Pinot Grigio. It was really getting me in my feels. And the poem just came to me and I just started writing. And I'll never forget, I called Julian after and I was like, are you sitting down? I was like, because girl, I think I have my poem. And here it is. Dolly at the Fox Theater, 2008. My mother glanced at my shirt as we waited, said, I don't know why you wore a Dairy Queen shirt to see Dolly. I laughed, told her to look again. My shirt says Dolly Queen. She looked away like something else caught her eye. The tour bus door swung open. A redhead exited first. It's Dolly's best friend, Judy, I whispered. Dolly waved as she walked down the bus steps, pausing at the bottom to listen to what we, her fans, were yelling. Early in the show, Dolly asked if there were any drag queens in the audience. My mother fidgeted in her seat. Someone near the front row jumped to her feet. Well, usually the drag queens come dressed as me, Dolly laughed, before launching into Jolene. When she sang the chorus for the second time, she crooned, drag queen, drag queen, drag queen, please don't take my man. The crowd cheered. I screamed, yes. My mother looked to her lap. Seated with an auto harp, Dolly told us about her coat of many colors and love for her mother. She asked if there were mothers in the audience. A few yelled, several hands shot up, including my mother's. Well, I dedicate this song to all the good mamas out there. I placed my arm around my mother, squeezed her tight, leaned my head against hers, gave her that moment.
Oh man. Oh, I just love that. That's outstanding. Woo. I'm so happy that poem exists. I'm happy that you had the Costco Pinot Grigio. It was worth it. That's so
Absolutely.
powerful.
Absolutely.
I think that's so great that it just touches on her ability to transcend, like you've already both said before, to transcend audiences and genres of music, time periods, and styles of artistic production. I mean, what
Yeah.
can't the woman do? And that's that moment of bringing together like that. That's just so evident in that wonderful poem. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I'm so glad this anthology exists. It's just such a wonderful book, and so many amazing authors represented here. What else do you want us to know about this book? The floor is yours to tell us anything more you want readers to know about. Let me say this.
It makes a great gift for Mother's Day, which is coming up. It makes a great gift for Father's Day. Hell, if it's a holiday, real one or not, it makes a great gift. And you're doing, as I said before, good in the world, because we are donating our editor royalties to the Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, which putting books in the hands of children is even more important today than it has ever been before, with the book bannings that we have coming on. And you just never know what these children may need that they're getting through these books. Dolly, the program, vets these books very carefully with very powerful messages and educational messages. So it warms my heart to know that they're getting into homes. Additionally, we have a link tree. So if you just Google "Let Me Say This" anthology link tree, you will find our link tree that has upcoming events, reviews. We've been excited that we've been on NPR twice. Yep, twice. Those interviews are linked there. And we do have some upcoming events, if I can promote those. So if
Please do.
you're in the Miami area, we will be at Books and Books on June 25th with some local, we have a delegation, I will say, from South Florida in the anthology. So we'll be reading in person in Coral Gables at Books and Books. It's a fabulous South Florida bookstore. If you're ever in town, you have to check them out. You can get a glass of wine. They have an outdoor bar. It's pretty fabulous. We'll be at the Graduate Nashville on the 5th, which is Nashville's Dolly Parton Day. We are really extremely excited to be partnering up with the Graduate for this event. So more details on that event. We have a virtual event on September 15th with Spoken and Heard, which is through Stewart's Opera House. Carrie Gunner Seymour, who's in the anthology and Ohio Poet Laureate, coordinates this series, and so we'll be reading with her. And plenty of time for people to book a trip to Miami, because we are doing a 1-year anniversary reading on January 19th, because that's Dolly's birthday. I know if you're watching this, you know that. So I'm just, I know everyone knows that, because that's my holiday. And it'll be at the Betsy Hotel, which is gorgeous and amazing. It's a staple in Miami. And the Betsy has a wonderful program. They run the Writers' Room, and they're very active in the literary community. And it's just amazing to see how much they put into writers when they're running a hotel. They understand the importance of the arts. And Julie?
I think you've covered it all, but we are really hoping that people will join us in Nashville to celebrate Dolly Day, because we're doing the reading at the Graduate, but on the rooftop is the White Limousine Bar, of course, spelled and named after really Dolly's album. So that would be fantastic to see as many people as can be to come out and celebrate Dolly.
That sounds really so fantastic.
Yeah.
You got me thinking about January 19th and going, where am I going to be on January 19th? I know that as editors, your work often happens all behind the scenes. You're so busy promoting the work of other people. What else do you, as poets or writers or whatever else you do in your lives, what else is next for you, Julie and Dustin? What other projects do you have going on? Is there anything else you want to tell us about what's going on with you and your work?
Dustin has a new book out.
Ooh, Dustin, show us your new book.
So it's Never Pick First for Playtime, which fits great for this conversation of pop culture because it's all Barbie poems. It's
Yes.
a chapbook that's written in tribute to Denise Duhamel's Kinky, which Kinky is actually on the cover there. And Denise wrote a foreword for the chapbook, so I'm quite thrilled with that. And I've been bad about promoting it because I've been promoting the Dolly book, so I've been very excited about this chapbook. So I hope people will check it out. I hear it's good. I hope
Absolutely.
it's good. And then I curate the Wild and Precious Life series, which is an online reading series. We have at least one reading a month, but sometimes I sneak in two because sometimes I just can't keep to my own rules of cutting back to one reading a month. So Limp Wrist is the magazine that I curate, and the Glitter Bomb Award is open. It's a contest for a single poem, no entry fee. You win $600. And it's being judged by Diane Seuss. Poets may have heard of her. No, just Diane
Yes,
Seuss.
they may have. Yes,
Is
they
the
may have.
judge for this year. So quite excited about that. So I hope people will check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for talking with me today. I'm really excited to continue to tell everyone I know about this awesome anthology. And well, I'm sure we will talk again, and maybe about your Barbie poems.
Love to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie and Dustin.
Thank you.